We have a class today that I've been waiting to have for about a year and a half. And just haven't gotten to it for a number of reasons. In part, just haven't gotten to it. And so we're going to do it today. And it's a perfect follow-up class to the last class with Bassam. And I'm calling it More Than Thanks. And I'll explain later in the class, we'll explain what that means. But what I need to do is walk you through what I mentioned last class about that talk that I did that really captured Bassam's attention and led him to reach out to me. And I'm going to do it in about 3 or 4 minutes. So it's really, you pay attention because you got to follow the basic line of argument. Okay? So it starts right here. That this is a global military empire, the United States. We have the largest military that the world has ever known. And we're responsible for holding on toward producing, using, manufacturing, holding on to, et cetera, et cetera. About half of all the global expenditures on military and defense issues. It is a massive global enterprise. And whether you think we need it or don't need it, or whether we should spend more or we should spend less, that's not anything that I want to talk about, or that's not anything that I addressed in this talk. The issue is, it's the starting point. It is a massive global military empire. And sometimes it's used for good, and indisputably, sometimes it's used for bad. And we argue about everything in the middle, because very few things are all good or all bad. So it's all the stuff in the middle that we argue about. And of course, most things are gray. But what's indisputable is this, okay? The second thing, and this is my talk, the second thing is that we are a Christian nation. 3 out of 4 Americans identify as Christians. And technically speaking, we're not, because of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, it is unconstitutional for us to use the government, i.e. taxpayer money, to support one religion or another. And while there are people of many different religious backgrounds living in the United States, and so we cannot officially declare us, again, constitutionally speaking, a Christian nation. We are a Christian nation for all intents and purposes. And most people in the United States would make the argument that we are essentially a Christian nation. And Christianity lives in places in the United States where sometimes it's just so obvious we don't even notice it. Okay? So, even Donald Trump, who I'm not sure has ever stepped foot in a church in his entire life, even Donald Trump talks about the Christian story in this great nation. And here he talks about God's love for all of humanity. But never in my lifetime, this is a very important pastor, Franklin Graham, the son of another very important big pastor in the United States. Never in my lifetime have we had a president willing to take such a strong, outspoken stance for the Christian faith. Okay? We're a Christian nation. It's just a given. Most people around, the vast majority of people around the world who look at the United States says, yep, This is a Christian nation. Americans are Christian. The assumption is that Americans follow Christianity. Okay? So, this is a guy that Trump hired as the National Security Council Chief of Staff. Not only are we a Christian nation, but we are a nation that holds a lot of very anti-Muslim views. And those anti-Muslim views have grown over the past 20 and 25 years, certainly since September 11, 2001. And this idea that the majority of Muslims and Islamic authorities promote or at least support jihad and Sharia supremacism, meaning that support the idea that Islam should dominate and take over the world. Okay? The same people who think Christianity should take over the world and the whole world should be Christian are the ones who are making the argument that Muslims think the whole world should be Muslim. And here's a meme that I found on my Facebook page one day that's not uncommon. We can find a lot of these. Right? We'll never bow down to the satanic cult of Islam. Just a lot of negativity about Muslims. Okay? So who are these guys? American soldiers. Who are they? Let me help you. They're Christians. When these soldiers show up anywhere in the world, most people in the world are going to look at them and say, Christians. Christian soldiers. And in our military, where we're not supposed to take sides, you can even find, certainly I'm sure soldiers have the Quran and soldiers have all sorts of religious texts, but here's a soldier with a Bible, and the insignia is with the U.S. Army. So now imagine these soldiers go into other lands, as we did in the war with Iraq, for the pretty explicit purpose of controlling the oil. So none of you were conscious or aware at the time, but that was the explicit purpose, not said outright, but later it comes out and say, yeah, of course, it's about oil. We wouldn't have gone into Iraq if they didn't have oil. And we know that we go places and we send our military places to control certain countries where we want to control resources and turn away from other things that are happening in other countries where they have no resources that we're interested in controlling. So now, what happens when we send these soldiers over to a place like Iraq with the stated government purpose fundamentally of controlling oil? We got to protect the oil. Then what do they become? Christian invaders. They're not just invaders. They're not just soldiers that are coming to invade. They're Christian invaders. You see, there's a difference there. And so what happened was I gave this talk called Christian Invaders. And the essential thing that I did in this talk was walk people through an idea. And the idea was empathy. And I started by saying, imagine that the Chinese came here because the Chinese wanted to control our coal. And they just felt like they needed the coal because their country ran on coal. And they needed that coal in order for them to really grow and prosper. So they came to the United States. They invaded the Chinese invaders for the coal. What would we do? We would rise up against them. We would say, you can't take our coal. This is our coal. And average Americans would start rising up against these Chinese soldiers who were here explicitly for the coal. Am I right? How many of you would rise up, would get your guns, and you'd be like, yeah, I'm on it, man. I I've never shot a gun. I don't know which end of a gun to hold, but give me a gun and I'll go fight the Chinese, whose troops are all in our streets trying to control and pacify us because essentially they want our coal. So what I did was say, step into the shoes of Americans who are defending their country from these invaders who are here for your resource. Now, go over to Iraq and just imagine that you're an average, ordinary Iraqi living your life, doing your thing, and here comes this other country on the other side of the world that fundamentally wants to control the oil that is under your land. How are you going to feel about that? We probably, if you use even a modicum of empathy, you can probably say, well, if I were to step into the shoes of the Americans who are rising up against these hypothetical Chinese invaders, then I could step into the shoes of the Iraqis who might be rising up against the Christian invaders. You see? Christian invaders. Because they're Christians. So this is it. They're not just American invaders, they're Christian invaders. Because the assumption is that they're all Christians, even though they're not. The assumption is that. So that's the experiment in empathy. Whoa. And it's pretty powerful because you have to stop. And you have to then take that word terrorist and you have to think about it a little bit differently. Who is the terrorist and what do the terrorists represent and what do they want? And you just got to stop and think about it. And it's not about taking the side of the terrorists. It's not about saying, hey, they're not wrong, they're right. It's not about supporting them. It's not about thinking somehow that they're not responsible for all the violence that they commit, including against their own people and one another and innocent people and so on. It's not about that. It's just an experiment in empathy. And because we're at a university, and because what we do here is we think and we stretch our minds to see the world in different ways, then this is the kind of thing that we do. Okay? So, after I turned the Christian Invaders talk into this TED Talk called A Radical Experiment in Empathy, it went online and I started getting responses. And so you spoke, last class we spoke to one gentleman from Iraq, Bassem Razo, who contacted me. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, I was contacted by this guy. And I've been contacted by many people in the military over the years about that talk. And some against it, most actually supporting it, most actually understanding exactly what it is that I was trying to do. And some against it, some thinking that I was being anti-American and this sort of thing. But at the time, this gentleman contacted me, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Edmonds, Special Forces, U.S. Army. And I immediately opened the email and said, hey, let me read this. What's he have to say? And what he said was, listen, I listened to your talk, and I have some things to say. And then he sent me some of the writing of a book that he was working on. And the book is called God Is Not Here. A powerful, powerful reading. If you ever want to read a book that will grab you. And, I wrote an Amazon review for it. And what I wrote, among the words that I wrote was, I said, instead of raising the flag and lighting the grill on Memorial Day, spend a few hours reading this book. It's courageous writing. And so, you all read, he also sent me this article, which is the one that we read a few weeks ago. A soldier's story about his experience in Iraq. And so, I said, listen, Bill, at some point in time, I want you to come visit my class. And so it turns out I kept forgetting to have you read the article before he actually showed up. And now I did, and now here he is today. So, Bill.
Hey, Sam.
Welcome to class. So, say hello to Bill. Hey, thanks. So you're in Germany right now.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So listen, let's just start with the question that I think it sort of is sitting on the table. Go back to you listening to that talk. I think you were jogging or something. I'm not really sure, but what is it that? But you were right. You wrote to me from a pub in London, I believe. And
Yeah.
what is it that led you to reach out to me?
Well, as I think most of you are right, 14 years ago I was in Mosul, Iraq, and over the course of many months, I came to see how, our strategies, our policies, our tactics, our one-on-one interactions were creating more insurgents than we could ever capture or kill. And so I wanted to put Americans in my shoes and try to give them a different perspective. That was, you read. I think you read it. It's called A Soldier's Story. But when that was originally published, I wrote that it was called The Ugly American in Iraq, and that obviously was changed. But then 14 years later, I'm in England attending King's College of London, and obviously I'm a TED fan. I try to expand my mind any way possible, and TED is one really important way to do so. And I'm particularly interested in empathy, and your talk came up, and so I wanted to reach out and tell you that there was another person who tried to put other people in their shoes. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so tell me. Thanks for that, and thanks for reaching out. I'm glad you did, because I really, as I've told you, your book was just really powerful. It was hard to read, I have to say. By the way, it took me probably 4 months to finish it, because
hopefully that's not because of the writing.
Yeah, the writing is extraordinary. So I mean, you're an amazing writer. But just the power, just your experience, your words, what you went through, what you experienced, what you described, and what is happening. It took me 4 months. It's rare that it takes me that long to read a book. So listen, let's just start in a most general sense. What would empathy? Let's stay with empathy for a second, because that's the theme that both of us were picking up on. What would empathy toward Iraqis look like? Just in the most general of senses. And you can go any direction you want, but...
Empathy toward Iraqis is, I think, empathy toward anyone. I think empathy it's what I've learned. I've never considered myself a very empathetic person. And in my experiences in Iraq, I guess, forced this capacity upon me. Empathy is... I think it's at the core of our humanity, our ability to step and imagine, not only imagine, but to actually truly feel the emotions or what we believe are the emotions of another person, is this, I think, the very source of our morality, our ability to choose right and wrong, and our ability and our desire to want to alleviate other people's suffering. That's my thoughts on empathy.
It's that very simple piece of just imagine ourselves in the shoes of other people, and what would we want? How would we want other people to see us, and how would we want to be treated? So what did you? Well, with that in mind, let me just follow with this question: what did you learn about Iraqis the people of Iraq, that you wish every American could understand?
I'll be frank to everyone in the class. When I went to Iraq, I didn't hate Muslims, but I disliked the religion. I disliked Islam, and therefore, by extension, I disliked Muslims. I thought Islam was an angry and violent religion, and over the course of many months, I came to see that I was completely wrong. There's I think the philosopher Albert Camus in the novel The Fall, he talks about a man he considers himself a good man, a brilliant man, and a charitable person. And he's alone one night, and to make a long story short, a woman falls in the river, and he considers his duty, and then the risk, his reputation, and then decides to walk away. What that man's choice was, that was his existential moment. And I think that's, it represents the existential moment in all of our choices. And what I learned is that Islam is an extremely peaceful religion, and that Muslims always look and always believe that they are always on that bridge, not always choosing the right choice or right action, but always knowing that there is a right choice to make and striving to stay on the good path. So that's, I guess, if there's one thing I would learn, that's what I learned, and I think it's made me a better person because of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's those words are really powerful coming from a soldier and someone in the special forces, right? Someone who has been places and done things and seen things in the way that you have. It's different, obviously they mean something coming from me, but I'm, a sociologist, right? I mean, who am I? But it's big. I hold those words very closely. As you know, Lori and I were just in Iraq visiting Bassam, and we've spent a lot of time in the Arab world, visiting many different places, many different trips. And one thing that struck me about Iraqis was the generosity and the kindness, the giving, even people who've lost so much. And here we come, these Americans, into this land, and yet we couldn't pay for anything. We couldn't do anything. Everybody was going to take care of us. Everybody wanted to make sure we were the honored guests. And Iraqis have this thing where, as you probably know, when you visit somebody's, well, maybe you don't because you were connected to the stuck on base more so, but when you visit someone's house, when you leave the house, they don't just walk you to the door and close the door. They walk you to the house or out to your car, and they make sure that you leave comfortably and you leave fine, and then they wave goodbye to you. You are the honored guest from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave. And once again, we couldn't pay for anything, nothing. And I'm wondering, specifically, what kinds of things did you see? And I know you wrote about these in some of your book, but what kinds of things did you see or learn from Iraqis? Gestures and this sort of thing.
I guess if I was going to say one thing, I'm not religious. I was raised Christian. But, to this day, I wear a cross. And the reason I wear a cross, it's a wood cross, is because an Iraqi made it for me. And that, to me, that was an amazing thing. they respected me not only as a person, but they saw me as a Christian, and so they wanted to do something for me as a Christian. And I think Iraqis are just like everyone else in the world. I've been to almost every continent except for Antarctica, doing operations. And honestly, there is so much more that unites all of us than divides us, and that goes with Iraqis as well.
That's cool. Hey, your parents were both peace activists, right? Weren't they? Weren't they? And you ended up in the military? So.
Yeah, I guess they were peace activists. My parents, during the Vietnam War, went to and joined the Peace Corps and went to Venezuela. And my two older sisters are adopted Venezuelans. My two younger sisters are adopted Mexicans. My parents grew up, I grew up in inner city Los Angeles. My parents have spent their entire life focused on trying to help disadvantaged youth, primarily Hispanics, just because of that's the location. So yeah, honestly, I see my job, our job, pretty much the same. The only reason different is being willing to go leave our family and home and our comforts to try to help other people. The only difference is I've done it with a gun.
Yeah. When my talk came out on TED, I received some criticism, or different people on the left thought I wasn't hard enough on the military, and I said, look, I've spent a lot of time working with people in the military, and special forces and all sorts of stuff, with our work with NATO and so on, and my gut feeling is most soldiers are social workers with guns. That has been my experience. So I don't think I'm naive about that at all, because I also have a neo-Marxist critique, if I can go there. So listen, let's go a different direction here. So in the beginning of your article, the one that my class wrote, you said of your experience in Iraq, at the end of the first paragraph, you said, I am a conflicted man. What's the core of the conflict that you were talking about?
I mean, the core of the conflict was certainty. I went to Iraq with absolute certainty, of my place in the world, and the righteousness of the cause. And over the course of many months, I was afforded a different perspective. Fighting the same war, fighting the same enemy, but seeing it from the fight from the Iraqi perspective, and engaging and interacting with not only Iraqi civilians but Iraqi insurgents every single day. And the conflict was, I for the first time saw the faults and foibles of us, my military and me, and it's an eye-opening experience.
It's very humbling. So somehow that conflict, that just cracked you into your core in some way.
Yeah, everyone has an identity, by definition. My identity was a patriotic American that could do no wrong, I am still extremely patriotic. I love my country, but I also see us as not perfect, just like everyone else, and I guess that started in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. So there's this song by the 1970s, 80s rock musician Bob Seger, and it's called Against the Wind. And that song has a line in it that he wrote it as a younger man, or he wrote it actually a little bit later in his life, but the line is, it always stops me in my tracks. I mean, it's just one of those, you have those songs from your youth that stops you and you just can't get it out of your head. But the line is, I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. I wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. And, I feel like I'm just running against the wind, right, is the song. So, what do you wish you didn't know now?
What do I wish
you could take a moment on that too, because this is a big question.
What do I wish?
Or I should say, is there anything, because I want to give you an out on this, or give you time. I know you would have something to say because you're a writer and a thinker. But, what do you wish?
I don't like regret. Everything that's happened in our lives, happened, was necessary for us to reach the point we are now. And I don't regret anything in Iraq. I guess if looking back, one of the most difficult things was, there was many smiles in Iraq, but there was also lots and lots of heartaches. Every single night there were prisoners, and there were interrogations, and that was a difficult time. But I wouldn't change anything. So I don't know if I don't know if I answered your question, Sam, but that's where I went with that.
Mm-hmm. Hey, let's talk about some of those interrogations. What did you learn from the prisoner? And who were the prisoner, by the way? Who were you interrogating, charged with interrogating? And what kinds of things were they doing? And what did you learn from them?
Well,
And by the way,
when I went to Iraq.
Wait, one
Can you hear
final
me?
thing.
Yeah.
This is a group of people. These are people who have only been rotating around the sun for 2 decades. So you got to start real basic. Who are these folks, right?
I guess the first thing that I realized is I wasn't in charge. I was the advisor to an Iraqi colonel who'd been interrogating for close to 30 years, and all I could do was try to point him in what I thought was the right direction, but I couldn't give him orders, and so the only power I had was persuasion, and as a young Christian middle-class American plopped down, I had little of that. So I tried to do the only thing I knew how was to learn everything I could about the Iraqis that I worked with and the Iraqis that they were interrogating. The language, the religion, the culture, the history. And, over the course of months, the prisoner, the insurgents that they captured and they brought in, were Iraqi society, ranging from, people that were manipulated to join the insurgency, who did it for money, for greed, for power, for hate. But there was also a small percentage that, that truly were moral people that believed that they were doing the right thing. And I think you have the pictures of one of those persons, but every once in a while, one of my counterpart would come across.
Wait, hang on 1 second. I want to show a photo. Let me show a couple photos here.
Yeah.
So this is, and that's so just so you know, class, that's not Bill on the left. That's an Iraqi. So this is a prisoner. And why cover their heads? What is that?
The Iraqis covered their head primarily for security purposes because it was very likely that a prisoner would get released to go back onto the streets, and they would be able to identify, the Iraqis who were interacting with them. That was the main reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what did you hear from the prisoners? Like, what is the? I remember you saying something to me about my talk, about the things that I was saying, and like what?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the large many themes, or one of the larger themes, was one, the Abu Ghraib prison torture incidents that Americans were involved with. I'm not sure everyone's familiar with that, but if you're not, just go look it up. And the perception of occupation, that they believed that Americans were occupiers, and that our actions were showing them the proof of that perception. So one of my jobs is, when a person would come through that my counterpart thought was a moral person who just hated Americans, he would ask me to interact with them. And that was, I think I wrote about it in that article. And every once in a while, most of the time, their perceptions would change, just as my perception changed in Iraq.
So after talking to you, their perception would change and yours would change. And this is the thing about this coming together. The next slide is you sitting in a chair speaking with a gentleman. And who is that? Who are you speaking with?
That's one of the insurgents that I wrote about. There was probably a good dozen or more over the course of that year who I sat and talked with. This person was he was a student at Mosul University at the time, prior, a few years before. After the invasion, he said he worked for America on the bases, installing computer system, wiring, IT. But over the course of the next few months, he got mad. The actual reasons why he got mad, I don't know, but there's I'm sure many reasons. And he joined what we called a mortar cell back then, where he would just try to lob mortars onto American and Iraqi bases to just hope that he could get lucky. But he was, Iraqis captured and brought him in, and my counterpart talked to him first and sensed that he was a good person, and asked me, and so he stopped my counterpart stopped interacting with him and stopped interrogating him, and just asked me to sit down and talk with him. And so we just talked. I told him about myself and where I came from, and he told him about himself. And that's what happened. And after a few weeks, I think he got a different perspective as well, and saw that his anger was being manipulated by a few Iraqis who were truly did hate America. Yeah. And so he confessed, and I don't know what ever happened to him, and that's one of those things I would love to be able to find out, but I don't know how.
It's interesting to hear that story, because that's just like what's happening here in the United States. There's a few people who are really extreme, but the vast majority on one side or another, but the vast majority of us are somewhere in the middle, and we have this idea that anybody who even approaches the extreme positions are all the way at the far end, and that's really not the case. And so here's this gentleman who you're talking to, and just like he could be anybody. And the other thing that's interesting about that is we're now doing dialogues in Mosul, and so we were at the University of Mosul. And so just the other day, in fact, a couple days ago, we had a video dialogue with students at the University of Mosul, with Penn State students. So, and next semester, this class the students who will be in this class will have many opportunities to talk to students at the University of Mosul. So it could end up being like, in a few years, this man's children or something. And, that's where we're going. That's what we need, man. That's what we need. Build the bridges. Hey, all right, so I want to go back to the title of today's class, More Than Thanks, if I could. And this idea that a lot of Americans, who are certainly flag-waving Americans are going to, if they encounter people in the military, and certainly people in the military who have served in a conflict zone, and they're going to say thank you, and thank you for your service. It's just like, it's just a thing that you say, and you're supposed to say. And that's really about it. People don't go much further because, A, many veterans don't want to be forthcoming about what their experiences were, and two, we don't even know how to start the conversation. We know there's certain things we can ask, or we're not supposed to ask, but we don't even know how to start the conversation. So we just sort of go around it, and we say, hey, thank you for your service. Can I buy you a beer? And then we start talking about baseball. And I have this idea. It's like, well, how about if you don't say just thank you for your service? How about if you go out and do something like read your book, or take some time to really listen to people who have had experiences like you've had? So what would you say as Bill Edmonds? What would you say to all Americans? Like, what would you want to say? Just about, how about instead of thank you for your service, how about a couple other things? Like, what would you want Americans to know? Or do you think they should know? Wait, hang on, you're muted. Yep.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
We're good.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah,
we're
we
good.
can hear you.
Yeah, honestly, I look across your class, and I am you. All service members and veterans are you. I imagine that there are veterans sitting in your
Get off
class.
the back wall.
And citizens ask other citizens to go to war. I guess if I was, to say one thing I guess try to remember that, there are limits to human endurance, that war pushes people to and beyond those limits, that bullets and bombs, they're not the only dangers that veterans and other service members faced during wartime. And that, honestly, no one should ever be blamed for the injuries that they themselves sustain, while they're faithfully serving their country, regardless of whether those injuries are physical, psychological, spiritual. And I think most importantly that our, national interests are best served by empathizing, giving the opportunity to listen to the stories of veterans, regardless of how those stories are conveyed, whether by book or just by across the beer. Do that. Listen rather than reproach them for, maybe not living up to our expectations, or worse, feeling sorry for them, for being weak or unlucky or whatever, curse we believe was the cause of their undoing. That's all I'd say.
Yeah.
Is try to make yourself aware of what we're asking our fellow citizens to do. And part of that awareness, is just, is creating a community. A community is a, shared experience. Not everyone can go to war, but you can try to understand what war is like. And don't ask about it, but be available to talk about it if someone wants to. That's all.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Thank you. And one of the things that I would add, and I would imagine you would agree with, is don't make it more dangerous for not only Americans, but for people in other places, in particular civilians, by using rhetoric and explosive ideas and narrow-minded ideas and thinking and words about things that you really don't know anything about. And it just really does makes the world a more dangerous place, and more people suffer and more people die. But you know, I'm never going to put my life on the line in the way that you did, or do, or other people who are in militaries, not just in the U.S. but around the world do. But nonetheless, it's dangerous. So it's more dangerous for some people than others. Hey, let me. I have a couple more. Who has a question? Who's got a question you want to ask? Yes. And come down to the front. If you have a question, who else has a question? Who else? Is anybody in the military here, by the way? I know there's somebody in the reserves. The card. Anyway, here. Bill, we will take a couple of questions. Yeah. Well, hang on. I don't know. Ask what should he call? Should she call you Lieutenant Colonel Edmonds? Or Bill?
Call me Bill.
Bill.
All right.
I apologize. I'm a little nervous. I just wanted to let you know that, first of all, I'm thankful that you came here and that, well, not here, but you're here giving this talk to us. I think it's really important to gain your perspective into this. I feel identified with everything that you're talking about because I'm Venezuelan and I've struggled and I lived in Saudi Arabia. So I've had an entire range of experiences that have led me to be empathetic in a way that I think most people haven't been able to experience or get there yet. And so basically what my issue is, my struggle, is this identification part that I can't really seem to identify with either the Venezuelan part or the American part or the Saudi Arabian part, Middle Eastern, for various reasons. So I think my question basically focuses on the part of the fact that even though I lived in Saudi Arabia for a long amount of years, like 8-10 years, and all of my best friends are from Saudi, or they're Lebanese, or they're Syrian, they're Muslim. Ironically, I've dated Muslims. And I, either way, here when I tell them, hey, I lived in Saudi Arabia, or this is who I am, I feel like I identify, there's a barrier or a disconnect in which I feel like I can't really step over and really be considered part of their culture. And so I guess my questions is both, what are those barriers, if you think they're religion or if they're just cultural or just social, or why they exist, or do they even exist, if that sums up my question. I know it's complicated, but yeah.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for the question. So Venezuela, American, and Saudi Arabia. That's quite the range of cultures. If I was going to just say one thing, empathy requires us to try to break down our barriers. And once you become familiar with a person, you start to see that they're more like you than not. And it's not saying not to judge. As moral people, we need to judge and we need to determine what we believe is right and wrong. But we can try to see, the world from their perspectives and try to draw the line of the circle more expansive, so that we can move beyond, just Venezuelan to, hopefully human. And that's all I can say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, who else has a question, comment, question, thought? Bro. So who else? A couple more people, and then, bro, come down. Yeah, just come down to the front real fast. It's easier.
All right, hello. Thank you for coming. My question is, you seem to You seem to have, is your perspective on like empathy and people in Iraq and stuff like that a common thing in the military, or is that more of a, are you more of a special case when it comes to viewpoints like that?
Honestly, I'm just like you. I'm an American who was plucked out of my small little town in rural California, and I was taken out of what my bubble. I actually just down the road, my wife's family is from Berlin. And same as there. If you got plucked out of there, honestly, no, I'm not special at all. I'm just like everyone else. I think the only thing difference is a very small percentage get the opportunity, get the opportunity that I had to try. That allows us to move outside of our small bubble and expand our universe. That's all. Honestly, there are more people like me than dislike me in the military. Definitely.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, bro.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for being here. I have two questions. One's kind of simple. I mean, they both might be simple, but what would you say to someone who wants to go into the military? Like, what advice would you give? Would it be as simple as just like keeping an open mind, or is it something more?
Well, looking at your haircut, are you in the military?
No, I just got accepted for officer candidate school from the Marines, so in the process, but not yet.
Good for you. Congratulations, man. Proud of you. Got lots of Marine friends. Honestly, no. When I joined the military, I was 17 years old, and honestly, I joined the Army because I thought the Navy's uniforms were really stupid. And, that was my perspective. You've chosen a right course, and honestly, I think it was the best choice for me. I think it's a great choice for anyone who wants to. It creates a good foundation of discipline, and it can open up your viewpoints of the world and try to give you a greater perspective than I think a lot of Americans have, who almost never leave their towns. Yeah. So no, I don't. Good luck.
All right, thanks. I have another question, actually. In your article, you talked about how like talking to the people there, that they said like the encounters they saw between the military and like the people there is pretty negative, and how you said you saw like other military people being pretty negative. Do you think the military should do something to try to have our soldiers be more open-minded and not have these negative encounters with the people where we're serving at, or do you think it's just kind of too big of a topic to like kind of grasp?
Honestly, I guess the first thing that you want to teach is to survive for people in the military, and beyond that, I think they do. I think they do teach about other cultures and the importance of it. It sinks in for some people more than other people. Yeah. So overall, I've been impressed with the military. Obviously, there's lots of things wrong, and we have probably more than most our faults. But yeah, I think they do teach. They try to work with other cultures. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
the project that we have and continue to have at Whirling Conversation is bringing cadets who are in training into dialogue with civilians in conflict zones. So our main area of work is in Afghanistan, but we work with cadets in NATO academies around the NATO alliance, just as a way to have this pre-deployment cross-cultural, deepen the understanding. So when you arrive on the ground, you at least have some foothold, some way to humanize, to see the other person. Everybody is human in this way, to be empathic toward them. So, yep, bro, you are on.
Hey, Bill, thanks for being here.
By the way, this is the only person in class with a tie on, so.
I don't usually dress like this.
Very impressive.
So you were talking a lot about opportunity, and I think I've kind of had the same fortunes as you of being able to travel and experience other cultures, which is why I think it's easier for me to empathize with those cultures. But I think for a lot of us, we don't have that opportunity to travel to those different places. So what can we do to empathize with the cultures or the people that we don't necessarily get the chance to interact with or be there in person? Beyond, I think what you're doing right now, going to college. Looking around I can't imagine how many countries are represented. Even though you're in, I guess, I'm not even sure what town you're in, but in Pennsylvania, somewhere. I listened to a talk the other day, and it was an experiment on empathy. And one of the things they did was to rent a person, where you could call up a number and ask to speak to a person from country X. And it was that person, that company's job was to find that and put you two together so that you can just have a conversation. And I think that's the very start. The very start is just a conversation. Amazing what you can go from there.
That's what this class is about largely, And that's what this class is about largely. And there are students here from all over the world, but what I said is I want them to go out on dates with one another. If I can get them to do that and even have sex with one another, I'll be really killing it. So, but that's you already do that? All right. Simon. All right, man. Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for your questions. Hey, so Bill, the young boy and the one I'm showing the photo of you with the young boy, the young Iraqi boy. Who is? What's the story behind that?
That is the son of one of my interpreter. He wasn't able to go to school at the time. It was just too dangerous, and so he brought him to work on the Iraqi base where I lived, and we employed him. We paid him what we could to do odd jobs around the base. And I would love to meet him again. He's a great kid.
All right. Okay. Hey, let's. Hey, I want to bring Bassem in if we could. All right. And what's cool? You haven't met Bassem, but I know that you've listened to him. You were watching the last class, and Bassem has read your article, and the two of you have so much in common in the way that you are thinking about things and the way that you're operating. And is Bassem here? Bassem, can you turn your video on if you can? Yeah, there you are. Hey, Bassem. Hey. So, what's interesting? So, Bill, when I was with Bassem in Iraq, his house was very close to the base where you were stationed. And so when I was there, I was feeling really the energy of both of you. And but Bassem, let me just ask you, so you heard Bill speaking about the Iraqi people. It felt really, well, yeah. How about you? How is that to hear that?
Hi, Sam. Hi, Bill. I'm so happy to finally see you in person. Sam told me about you while we were having tea in the lobby of the hotel, and he told me about your book. And then 2 weeks ago, he sent me your article, and I read your article. And I see where you're coming from. Empathy is what we try to accomplish, and that's what brought us together into this platform. Like I said last Tuesday, that Iraqis are peace-loving people, and you lived there. And at the beginning of the invasion in 2003, my house was across the street from an American base. And about 11 p.m., I was sitting in my garden, And my door was knocked, and I opened the door, and there was this young American soldier. And he said, "Sir, can you do me a favor?" I said, "What do you need?" He said, "I need to get an email to my mom, and we don't have internet on base." I said, "Sure, just write the letter." I gave him a flash disk. I said, "Write your letter, give me your mom's email, and I will email it." I said, "Would you like to come in?" And it seems like for security purposes, he was afraid to enter the house, so he just brought me the flash disk, and I emailed the letter for him. And 2 days later, I got an email from his mom, and I gave it to him. So up to 2004, things were easy for Americans in Mosul, and suddenly everything deteriorated. So I don't know, something happened. And then I have one question for you. As an American soldier who lived in Iraq in 2005, I have one question. When you mentioned this young kid from the university, I have always wondered why, when a young person who was not really an insurgent was arrested, and then he was put in jail with hardcore criminals like Qaeda, like in Puka, in Abu Ghraib. And I believe that these two prisons became a hatching and breeding environment for these young kids. My question is, was this a mistake, or was this done on purpose?
Well, it's tough questions. But first, Bassem, it's really great to hear you and see you. And I honestly, I want to apologize and say I'm sorry for your loss. And honestly, your example of forgiveness is something that I don't think I could. I hope that I could live up to one day. Now, to go to your question, I lived and worked in an Iraqi base, in an Iraqi prison, and their prisoners were, you couldn't have a person for more than 7 days. Yes, I agree that the larger prisons, yes, they were a breeding ground. But no, I don't believe that was on purpose. No, it was more out of ignorance. Yeah, that's my answer.
I think, Bill, one of the things that I get from your article that we read in my classes, all the decisions that just get made haphazardly, and in that sense are just really, and are so wrong-headed, and how so often they're done by people who just are unwilling to imagine ourselves in a different kinds of situation, including people who are making these top-level decisions. And then we do really stupid things, and we're not educating ourselves, right? Like, the one thing that was really clear in your article is you came to see the humanity of people in Iraq, and it's just how that changed the way you then would make decisions versus before you went over. And I think that in many ways that's the role of this class, and it's the role of, it's the foundation of my friendship with Bassem, who has become, by the way, one of my closest friends in the world, with whom he and I share things that we don't share with other people. So it's really, Bill. So I know you said this, but I just want to hear it. Bassem's approach toward justice, his choosing the path of justice and forgiveness. It is so hard to get Americans to understand that is not unusual, that he is not the exception. Like that is a Muslim framework for seeing the world. And I'm wondering maybe if the two of you could maybe you could say something. I feel like I'm alone. I'm like this American trying to convince these folks. It's like, look, if you understood, right? As I said before, I
I went to Iraq. Well, I left Iraq a completely different person than I went to Iraq. And yes, what I learned was that yes, Iraqis, but Muslims, I guess, but so, most cultures, I can't think of a culture I haven't been to that are just nice people, and peaceful people. And, they have kids, they want to see them be happy and grow old, and they go get groceries, and, they have parents that annoy the hell out of them. And, they go to school and listen to really obnoxious teachers blabber on. As I said, there's just so much that we have in common, and yes, Iraqis are very good at forgiveness.
Hey, do you have a question for Bassem?
No, no, I sure don't, Sam.
Hey,
not right now.
Bassem?
Well, I tried to get your book, Bill, here, but it seems Amazon, they don't deliver to Iraq. So hopefully when I'm in the United States, I'm getting your book and I'm reading it. And we'll discuss it later.
Yeah.
Awesome. When you come here in the fall, I'll make sure I'll make sure you leave home with a copy, a couple of copies.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, Bill, to talk to you, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Bassem. It's an honor too.
Yeah. Does anybody have we have these two. Hey, by the way, Bill, I should add, what is the book that you have, just the book that you've edited on peace? What?
On peace? No.
Aren't you editing a book? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was a contributor. I wrote an essay for a book that came out, a year ago called, War and Moral Injury.
Yeah.
And the most recent one was my dissertation, which I talked about how an ancient Buddhist psychology and practice called dependent origination can, I guess, be a path to lessen the suffering of war fighters who come back experiencing shame.
Mm-hmm.
There.
Does anybody have a question? We have time for a final couple of questions for these two awesome gentlemen. Anybody, or is it going to be me? Okay, it's going to be me. Then listen, I've got one for both of you. I just as a teacher who is the reason I have taken on this work in the way that I have is because I too have started to travel and started to meet people in other areas of the world, and what I found was that pretty much what both of you have said was very much what both of you have said, that people are mostly the same all over, and it really doesn't matter where I go. We all want the same things. And Lori was in class a couple of weeks ago, and somebody asked her a question about, or I guess I asked her the question about what she learned from her travels, and she said that I have no one to fear. There is nobody in the world who I need, no group who I need to fear. There are individuals, but there is no single group. And yet sometimes in doing this work, I feel like I'm just swimming upstream because it's so much. And I don't know, I have this class and they're here and they're interested, but tell me what you need to tell me to keep going, man, because it's hard sometimes. Y'all, right? It's hard. So let me hear from both of you. You tell me what I need to know to keep doing what I'm doing, and we have about 4 minutes left.
You're doing a great job, Sam. Great job. Yeah. If I had a brownie, I'd give it to you. No, I think opportunities like your class are important, and it's good to hear you and your talks, especially what if you hadn't talked on TED, I wouldn't be here today. So yeah, that's I'll leave it to Bassem.
Yeah, same with me. If I didn't watch the Radical Experiment in Empathy, I wouldn't be here. Sam, you're a brave person. You go places that I don't think everybody will go to. Like when I came to the United States with the stereotyping and in New York and being so dangerous, I was there in the 80s. And when I came, everybody told me, don't go to the subway, don't ride the train, it's dangerous. But I did, and I did not feel afraid riding the train. So everybody should travel, get out of his bubble, see the world, talk to other people. And Bill, I really wish one day we can meet face to face. Thank you so much.
Yeah, me too, Bassem. If I can just say one thing to your class,
Yep.
You're here, you're in school, you're in the best place in the world. Don't be in a rush to leave. That's all I have to say.
Hey, there are a few people in here who aren't going to pass my class, and they'll be back another semester. So, yeah, they'll take you up on it. All right, listen, gentlemen, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And as with Bassem, Bill, hopefully one day you will when you're back in the U.S., I'll have you here in person. So, all right. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
All right, y'all.